Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Unleashing Potentials podcast. So joining me today is JP. Welcome, JP. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on the podcast. So before we start, can you tell us who you are and what you do?
I am a 40-year-old single girl dad to an 8-year-old, and her mother and I have been apart since she just turned two. Right after she turned two, we'd split up. And so we obviously, like any breakup or any sort of thing like that, there was the troubling times and the conflict and the fighting and all that stuff. And then we have gotten to a place where we co-parent well, and that in turn sort of became a passion of mine. You know what I mean? It's less likely for people in situations like mine, and it's more of an outlier to get along with your ex and do the school stuff and the holidays. And my ex is in an unmarried blended family, and so her boyfriend and his son, we all go to the lake and we all go to the sporting events and we all do the barbecue stuff, and it's not a big deal, but to everybody from the outside looking in, it seems really strange because the society tells you that you should be at each other's throats and you should be using your kids as weapons and spies and ways to hurt the other person. And so for the last year or so, I've been speaking and advocating and whatever I can do to sort of normalize healthy co-parenting over all the conflict, because essentially your pettiness or hurt feelings is not hurting the other person near as much as it's going to hurt the children.
Yeah.
The downstream effects later in life of the not trusting people and anxiety and feeling like they weren't really accepted or loved because they were used as a weapon more than towards the other parent than being a child. So I help people go from conflict to collaboration.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I love that you do that because it's something you've been through, you have experience, and you use your experience as an outlet to help people find healthy ways to heal and co-parent. That's really awesome that you do that. And
Thank you.
it can be hard, obviously on the parents, but the kids when they're caught in between. And I've been through my ups and downs for probably a good 8-10 years and lots of conflict. In the past 2-3 years, things have settled down and we're working together, and it's in the best interest of my daughter. But yeah, I can definitely relate to all of that, and I know I'm not alone as well.
Right. And it is I'm sure that it sort of depends ish. I mean, every situation is a little bit different, but there are a lot of parallels, regarding mindset or the way that they perceive things and the reality that each person's creating for themselves and the environments that they're creating for the children. It's not really a specific, the males act this way and the females act this way, or, geographical specific. It's the same whether you're in the US or you're in Australia or you're in Canada or you're in Ireland, Europe, anywhere. It's the same similarities regardless of where you are for the most part.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on how the pandemic impacted those who are co-parenting or parenting in general?
It put an extra level or layer of strain on everybody, but fear kind of does that, or being in the unknown. A lot of people took advantage of mandates and pandemic type stuff to be able to add another layer of control, or fear or spite or whatever. And so whoever was the more dominant personality, or felt like they had control over time, or what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, sort of gave them an inch, but maybe more of them took a mile, and have continued. I kind of see it a lot now. It's sort of that year and a half, 2 years where everything was up in the air, and time was more restricted, and where you could go was restricted. It hasn't. A lot of people are less, have not let go of that stranglehold as much as you would have thought they would have. They're still kind of holding on to those kinds of schedules, and those kinds of control over that other person. So depending on your area and the mandates that you had going, in where you were and stuff like that. But they haven't loosened. A lot of people haven't quite loosened up on, going back to more of a split schedule or.
Yeah. Share with us your thoughts on the importance of keeping open, healthy, respectful communications between parents, especially when the kids can hear and see what's happening.
Well, it's communication is probably the most important thing in any situation, whether it's co-parenting, communicating with your current partner, communicating with your children, communicating with your coworkers, your bosses, whoever that you're interacting with day in and day out. Communication is important. There are definitely open communication and having difficult conversations, and being able to in order to have open communication and be able to communicate well, especially in a co-parenting relationship, before you can get to a place to where you're in a safe place to be able to openly communicate, you almost have to let go of the baggage of the relationship. You know what I mean? Like, the first thing that I tell people that they need to do is sort of leave the pity party, and let go of the shame, and let go of the anger or the resentment or the pettiness, the spitefulness. Once you can work through and let that relationship go and grieve it, and it is what it is, it's in the past, then the communication becomes easier, because you're not getting triggered as much. Not everything's going to be a trigger. And so when something comes up, it won't trigger the other person and then start the poking back and forth and then turn into a big argument. And the other thing that seems to happen quite a bit, I didn't run into this on my side. I never did it. And whether my ex did, I'm not 100% sure, but not that I had heard of. Talking negatively and downgrading the other parent, you know what I mean? Because you're still essentially talking about your child's parent, and whether you think of them a certain way, maybe you don't need to express it so much in front of the kids. And talking, I hear a lot of people say, well, I don't badmouth the other person until the kids go to bed, and it's like, just because they're asleep doesn't mean that they're not hearing it. You know what I mean? Like, they may not even be asleep yet, but we wouldn't have made it out of caves if we weren't consciously aware of everything around us while we were sleeping. And so but that all falls in line with grieving the relationship, letting it go, and letting some of those feelings that aren't helpful and aren't healthy, let that stuff go, because you're essentially going to start brainwashing your children, telling them and beating it in their heads that the other parent is this way, whether they are or not. It could just be your hurt feelings and you're lashing out, or frustration, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, you're right. Because I know it happened to me. um, just my ex and people who were involved. At the time I had, obviously I was undergoing so much stress, and I was developing mental health issues and depression and anxiety and all of it. And it happened to me, them telling her things about me. Rocky, sorry.
Oh, no, that's
What are
okay.
you looking for?
The teeth.
The what?
I take the cat. I need that.
Which one?
Okay, right here.
The green tape?
Look, okay, well, right there.
Okay. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
I need Rocky.
No, go. Okay. I'll be done finished. Okay, where was I? That's why I don't record on the weekend. They normally
Yeah.
let me. He lets go downstairs, Rocky. Please. Thank you.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's part of being a parent.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So I was just saying that it happened to me. Going through medical and health issues, that was used against me in court and talked about my daughter and all of that. And it did, and it still does quite a bit of damage, not only to me, but to her.
Right.
And I lost her at the time. She was staying with them, and she's with me now, full time. And she doesn't see the things that they were saying about me in me now that she's
Right.
with me. I'm just mom.
Right.
Yeah. In your opinion, what forms of communications would you say is healthy to do? Email, phone calls, text?
Well, for me, for when it was rockier in the beginning and all that stuff, we did more text because it just wouldn't kind of snowball into an argument and that kind of stuff. And so texting was better. The last 4 or 5, 6 years, it's I mean, we speak, if it's easier to talk on the phone, we talk on the phone or text. If it's just what time you're going to be into town, what time you're getting off work, what time you're picking her up, this and that. We probably communicate back and forth more than typical co-parenting relationships, but my daughter goes back and forth at will. We have a rough outline of sort of a schedule that pretty much is only scheduled to work around her boyfriend's son, so that when they have him, they have her, so they have both kids on this weekend and then no kids the next weekend, so they can take a break and do whatever they want to do. But other than that, if my daughter wants to come stay with me, it's no big deal. We only live about 6 blocks away from each other also. So it's just, and we're at a place, you know what I mean? Obviously the phone call, if you can get to a place where you're not worried about needing documentation or needing, you know what I mean? If the needling or you're still bickering back and forth, or if they tend to be more on the flaky side of saying yes to something and then last minute saying, no, I never said yes. You want to keep those kinds of conversations probably more text or email, because even if things are going well, it's not a bad idea to always protect yourself. And know that you're doing what you can to protect yourself and protect your child, and you know what I mean. But I mean, I still have conversations with my ex's parents if they're going to be visiting in town, or my daughter's going to visit them in Oregon or anything like that. Like, it's not a big deal for me to talk to my ex's parents, and not a big deal for my ex to talk to my mom and stuff. But everybody's pretty open about the communication and all of that stuff. And so if you're getting, while you're getting to a place, you know, I would say probably text message or email.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then so that you have, it's all there, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
That way if something does come up, you have what you need. It's not he said, she said.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
But
I agree.
later, you know, phone calls are no big deal if it's just what time are you going to come, you know.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I agree. Obviously, it depends on the situation. I know that for some people, and for me, at one point there was court orders that stated the exact type of communications that were supposed to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's different for everybody, but
Right.
it sounds like you have a very healthy communication and relationship and system going on, and it's
Yeah.
very admirable to hear and see and to hear of your story. And I know your story is going to help so many people that are struggling with those situations.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and there's a few things in my story that are, you know, outside of the obvious. We get along and everything, you know, we don't have the added layer of being in the system or court's involvement. You know what I mean? We figured everything out between ourselves,
Mhm.
and we're able to do it and communicate with each other. We're a united front with my daughter. If she's grounded there, she's grounded here. No tablet there, no tablet here.
Mhm. Mhm.
There's not a, you know, there's no playing us back and forth or
Yeah.
getting pitted back and forth, you know, like, well, I want to go to dad's house because he'll let me be on my tablet all day. You're going to make me do yard work at mom's or whatever. But so some of the stresses that the legality part of it or being in the system adds,
Mhm.
we didn't we were unmarried, so we didn't just automatically fall into that. But once you can get through the initial, you know, the court mandates of the parenting plan that, you know, everybody agrees on at the beginning,
Mhm.
you can get to a place to where you get along and you can work it out yourselves and you can mold that parenting plan without having to
Mhm.
really, you know, the phone call stuff and the way of talking and this and that, you know. And even if, I mean, it depends on where you live, obviously, you know,
Yeah.
some courts are a little bit different, but
Mhm. Yeah.
we sort of skipped a lot of that and had to figure it out ourselves. But we had the open communication to sidestep a lot of minefields, you know.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
were little things that we had agreed on very early on that took out a lot of the conflict,
Mhm.
which helped, you know.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Now let's talk about parenting styles. Why is
Mm-hmm.
it important to have healthy parenting styles between parents and caregivers?
Well, you have to. Well, it took me a while to come to terms with it,
Mhm.
but everybody's doing the best that they can with the tools that they have, you know, and being able to break certain generational curses or tendencies or not buy into the societal norms of this is how everybody's supposed to be and stuff like that is a bit of a minefield. Her mother and my parenting styles are pretty similar, but we were raised in the same town in the same small area with the same sort of background. And so, but I was raised in a sort of there was a lot of things that I was raised that I told myself my whole life that if I had kids that I wasn't gonna be like that. You know, the same give and take from your parents.
Mhm.
But one thing that I've always kind of held on to was, people talk about success and if there's have a lot of money, there's, society tells you if you have a lot of money as a man, you're successful, or if you're very pretty as a woman and you marry a man that has money, then you're successful. And, if you have a million Instagram followers, then you're successful, whatever it is.
Mm.
But I've always been a little bit off thinking like, if I raise my daughter to be a better person than I am, more compassionate, more confident, able to deal with difficult situations and difficult conversations and all these things better than I can, then I'm successful, like that's sort of how I gauge it. And so I try to help guide and instill certain values or traits that will set her up to be more successful, being able to have difficult conversations, to walk away from people that aren't healthy for your mental state. You know what I mean? The ones that are going to try to use you more or get something from you or bullying, stuff like that. She's not quite a teenager yet, but
yeah.
So some of the parenting style, but I'm really involved. I go to the school stuff and I go to the sports stuff and I go to the dance recital and we go to the park and do arts and crafts and do all these things together. Whereas, I have a brother that has kids right around the same age as my daughter, and he's not like that, not as involved as I am, I guess you'd say.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And with parenting styles, it can be tricky for some parents because maybe each parent are from a different culture and they were raised differently, and there can be a clash in forces coming together, even though both parent wants the best for the kids, but it just doesn't always work. They don't always see eye to eye. Could be what religion they want to, if they're from different
right.
And what do they want for their kids, their education and beliefs and how they discipline and routines and all of that. Again, I love when you're talking about communication, because that's important. Where it comes in also to have a say and to come together as one for the sake of kids.
Right. And I mean, I wish it for me, it has worked out that our parenting style, the relationship that I had with her mother didn't work out, but the commonalities raising our daughter are pretty well aligned, which I lucked out. But the difficult conversations and these different things, it's not very common that two people will have these conversations about parenting style and goals, 5-year plans, where they want to live, where they want their kids to go to school. They typically don't have these conversations before they have kids. And then all of a sudden you got a 3-year-old and one wants to discipline one way and the other one is the polar opposite. And it's hard on the kids because obviously if one disciplines them one way and then the other disciplines them a completely different way, the one that isn't, the kids are going to gravitate one way or the other instead of, being in a situation where me and her are kind of on the same page. We got pretty lucky with my daughter. She was an easy child. And so there was never much discipline to be given out. But, if you're not on the same page and being able to communicate with, this is what is expected at my house, pick up after yourself, do your own laundry, help with the dishes, help cook dinner, whatever the case may be. If she has a dog at her mom's house, and so that's one of her chores over there, So, but if she didn't have to do any of those things here that she has to help out at her mom's house, then obviously she's going to want to be here all the time because she doesn't have to do those things.
Yeah.
And if we didn't communicate about those things, then It's not, and then, the parent would start to maybe blame the other parent. Or, if my daughter never wanted to come over here because she had to help with chores, but not at her mom's house, maybe I start getting depressed and anxious, trying to figure out why my daughter doesn't want to spend time with me when it's, possibly something as simple as just not wanting to do chores. But then I'm losing time. And it essentially is just because I'm not communicating with my ex about what's expected at both houses and why she's grounded here, why she should be grounded there, or be without the tablet, or be without whatever,
Yeah. And also with parenting styles, sometimes some parents, they need to understand that it's okay to agree and disagree. Again, as I was explaining with different culture, how one culture may choose to do something different with a child, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's unhealthy or bad for the child. It's just a different lens of looking at it. It's just a different outlook. But unfortunately, some parents do get out of their way just to criticize that parent for having that view and perspective. I've had that happen to me, and me and my ex are from the same country, same culture. I just had a different outlook, and it just wasn't matching his expectations of what he needed to see happen.
Well, and compromise can be a beautiful thing, if you can communicate and discuss and find a happy medium to where it would be, similar in both places, rather than one digging their heels in and the other digging their heels in, and then you have two adults butting their heads that aren't going to budge because I'm right, you're wrong, this is how it's going to be, as opposed to how can we work together for the child to be the most successful, or set them up to be the most successful, because obviously when you're talking about very young, very small children, they have less of a choice which side they want to go to and which house they want to go to. But as they get older, they're learning who they are. Hormones are going crazy. They get 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. They're going to gravitate to the house that probably has less rules, less responsibilities, and less consequences for the things that they may or may not want to explore, experiment with, choose to do at school, So they're going to choose the one that, but if both houses are the same, or they're raised in a place where this is how people act, and this is the morals and values that you should, try to instill or have on your own. I mean, all kids are going to run around and do stupid stuff because they're kids, but it's, you can't be the one that you can't be the friend while the other parent is the parent, because then you're not setting them up to be successful later in life,
Yeah, I agree. Let's talk about boundaries. Why is it important for parents to have healthy boundaries between them? A few examples could be emotional boundaries, physical boundaries, and mental boundaries, because all of those can be broken and it can be draining for either parents and kids.
Right. Well, boundaries are one of probably the most important things that you can set and hold in all aspects of your life, whether it's with your kids, with your ex, with your employers, with coworkers, and knowing what your boundaries are, and then being able to effectively communicate those boundaries to where people understand is important. Because if you don't know what your boundaries are, nobody else does either, because nobody's a mind reader. but you're still going to get hurt, get frustrated, and get angry if people are crossing your boundaries. And so you can't get mad at the other parent for maybe crossing a boundary that you haven't been able to effectively relay and say, this is my boundary. You are not. And holding the boundaries without being able to communicate your boundaries, knowing what your boundaries are, but also being able to hold your boundaries without engaging with whatever boundaries, if your drop off is at McDonald's and your ex is throwing a huge scene in the parking lot, you don't have to sit there and throw gas on that fire. You can say, this is not how you speak to another adult. Get in your car and leave. You don't have to feed into some of those behaviors, especially with anything that has to do with any kind of emotional, mental, physical abuse. You are not obligated to take it to prove to anybody that you're a good parent, because you can sit there in a parking lot and get yelled at for 20 minutes, or go to pick your child up and have to shut the door behind you and not let you leave. Like, holding you when you don't want to be there is, that's an important boundary,
Yeah.
And so they're important. I mean, you have to know, but you got to know your boundaries first. But also, one thing that I see a lot is I'll talk to people and they'll know their boundaries, but their boundaries don't relate to the other person, and so it's a double standard. So they don't want their ex stalking them on Facebook, or their ex's family stalking them on Facebook, but they feel like it's completely acceptable for them to do it, vice versa. And so whatever boundaries you set, if your ex isn't allowed, if you don't think your ex has any business knowing what you're doing outside of your time with your child, it goes both ways. You have no right to dig into their life unless it is something, obviously there are situations where, but, as far as my relationship, we'd set some boundaries pretty early on, and it alleviated a lot of conflict because neither of us crossed the boundary or broke it. You know what I mean? One that we had set was, especially when she was young, like 2 to 7-ish. And even still now, if I have her, or if my ex has her and something comes up, the other person got first phone call. So if I got a phone call that there was a concert that was not going to show back up for 5 years the day of, and it's a Saturday, I would call my ex before I would call a babysitter, because you get first, if you're busy, or if she's busy, and says, I got something going on too, let's get a babysitter or whatever, call your mom, call a family member, but neither of us ever needled, you know what I mean? You got to get to a place where you're not like, well, if you wanted, maybe you just won't see them the next time, next weekend, if you don't want them when it's your time, but we never sort of played that kind of game. Or as far as the dating, meeting somebody new, moving on from the relationship that we had, we had a boundary that we got to meet whoever was going to meet our daughter before they did, to get a feel for that person. And so it wasn't like, it was never a situation where my ex was dropping my daughter off and like, oh, dad's got a girlfriend that lives at his house now. You know what I mean? Like, without her knowing anything about that, so if it was a situation where it was getting serious, then we got to meet that person before they were brought around our daughter and stuff like that. So knowing what boundaries are going to be important is definitely a huge thing.
Yeah, yeah. And I think boundaries are not bad. Sometimes some people see it as bad, as if we're a bad person. If we look at it in reality, there are boundaries everywhere.
Right.
If someone drives, you must stop at a stop sign. You must follow
Right.
traffic laws. And
Hmm.
at a grocery store, you must pay before you get the groceries, or else you
Right.
other ways, right? So it's no different than us as parents wanting to
Hmm.
have healthy boundaries and setting them. And I think sometimes, based on how we set boundaries, it's a reflection of how we're feeling in the moment, or it
Right.
could be a reflection of how we were brought up as kids.
Right.
I'll give an example for me. I had no choice but to be in the home that I was in. Very shitty, traumatic childhood with an alcoholic father who passed in 2020, abusive to my mom. Um, I had to learn to set my own boundaries. Did I know how to
Hmm.
set them prior to that? Absolutely not. And I still have issues with men because I never had a male role model there for me to teach me and show me things, right? So
Right.
some boundaries can be weak, they can be strong. And sometimes we need help to set those boundaries, meaning could be court. I had to go to court to set boundaries because I was getting stalked. I had to
Hmm.
change my phone number, my
Right.
email. I
Right.
had to move, and my ex at the time was messaged through Facebook. It was, and my family members were being messaged by people on their fake names. It was just too
Hmm.
much. So no wonder I
Right.
had a
Right.
mental breakdown. It just continued to happen and over and over and over. And I know I'm not alone. That's the sad
Right.
part. It's happening with most parents. And it's very sad to see because there are ways to work through those. And I want to hear your take on this. When parents are dealing with any types of substance abuse, again,
Hmm.
that's another type of boundaries that parents need to set. What are your take
Right.
on
Well, I mean, with all of these things and all the boundaries and the communication and the way that you are interacting
that? Mhm.
boundary wise or anything, you're teaching your kids what's acceptable behavior and what's not. And so, you know, like your situation is, I'm very sorry that you had to go through all of those things,
Mhm.
but getting the courts involved and getting, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's not failure, and enabling that behavior is you're doing a bigger disservice than getting the courts involved. Like there's no shame in stopping what is inappropriate, because your children are essentially going to grow up thinking that they can do whatever they want,
Yeah.
because nobody was ever held accountable for their actions for crossing boundaries and doing things that were inappropriate or anything like that. um
Mhm.
Substance abuse and drinking is a so I grew up in an alcoholic home as a child.
Me too.
Well, my dad stopped drinking. My mom never really was a drinker, but my dad quit drinking when I was very young. I was like 4 or 5 years old. And so we'd spend a lot of time at AA and stuff like that. Even knowing that he wasn't drinking,
Mhm.
it went from one consumption to a different consumption. You know, his mindset, personality remained the same. Um, I drank really hard from teenage years up till about around the time my daughter was born.
Mhm.
Currently, I think I've drank like one time in the last 3 years or something. Like
Mhm.
but it's just an I don't it's not a conscious effort. It's just a non-issue for me. Um, her mother drinks, but not is a social drinker. You know what I mean? Like when they go camping, or you know they go out on the weekends or whatever whatever they do.
Mhm.
Um, And so in my situation, it's not a huge obstacle or something that has come up a lot. But if neglect is being nothing, I'm a firm believer that anything in moderation is okay. Now, that's not to say that if after I drank 3 beers, I start poking at my daughter and becoming like mentally emotional abusive type antagonist, that's okay. So case to case is different, but I mean, if alcohol or drugs is more important to you than your children, then maybe the other parent should get the courts involved, and the kids maybe don't need to go to your house, because if you're getting drunk and passing out on the couch every night that you have your kids at 6 p.m. and they got to fend for themselves and cook their own food and do all these things because you'd rather drown yourself in a bottle, then you probably shouldn't have become a parent. But the kids don't have a choice, didn't have a choice to be born, and don't have a choice. But the other parent and the legal system have a choice on whether or not you should be that involved in your kid's life. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so but it's all tricky. It's
Yeah.
It's a gray area because just because it's not so cut and dry as something like physical abuse or emotional abuse or something like that, to where it's cut and dry. You do it, you lose your kids. Like, I'm a firm believer, like,
Yeah.
you don't need to beat on kids, and you don't need to touch kids, and you don't need to yell at kids and make them feel small because they didn't ask to carry your emotional baggage. But with the drinking, obviously illegal drugs and don't really have a place in a child's home, for sure.
Yeah.
But if you suspect it as the other parent, or know that kind of stuff is going on, you are allowed to make sure your children are safe, and in a place that they should be in. And so, if your kids are saying that the other parent's doing drugs in front of them, or drinking every day till they pass out, or day drinking all day and getting mad at the end of the day and stuff, like, it's not outside of your right to do a wellness check and have the police go over there and check when they have your kids. And if the law enforcement people and the CPS people and the courts decide that that's not in the best interest of the children, then you're doing right by your children, and kind of fuck the other parent.
Yeah.
If they don't want to be a parent, then they don't need to be a parent, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. See, it's a very complex topic because some parents do drink. It's not like every day, once
Right.
in a while, which is fine. And again, I'm not trying to bring down parents or people who actually want to get clean, to have their family together. I'm looking at the other end of the rainbow, which is not a rainbow at all. When things are really bad. And that's why, in my opinion, I appreciate what the court can do on behalf of kids and parents. Because sometimes with us butting head with each other, and families involved and friends involved, it can be overwhelming and completely outside of someone's control. But who would they listen to? The court, the police, and the other resources. So I appreciate that kind of support. Actually, it has helped me, and I know it has helped many other people as well.
Yeah, and it's if you're if you allow the system to do what the system is designed to do, I wholeheartedly believe that they will try to do the best that they can and make the right decisions. But you run into a lot of instances too where the other parent is trying to use the system as a weapon against the other parent, you know. And it is by embellishing, you know, the truth, or maybe embellishing how much the other parent drinks, or whether they actually drink when the children are there, or, you know, whatever the case may be. And that I don't condone as much, you know what I mean? But if you're coming from an authentic place of real compassion and worry for your children, then absolutely use every resource that you have. If you're, you know, in a situation where you drop your kids off at the door and you look inside the house and there's empty beer bottles spilling off of the coffee table and empty whiskey bottles, and the house is dirty, and your kids are running around and with no clothes on and stuff like that, then yeah, you know, they're not being taken care of. Probably.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I agree. And you know, I hope that one day parents stop using the system as a malicious way to get to the other parent, because it happened to me, and I was getting help. I wasn't addicted to anything. I was having psychosis due to all the stress, which can happen to anybody, by the way, undergoing that much stress. But yeah, happened to me as well. Let's talk about family members when they truly need to leave themselves out of situations that does not concern them, because it happens all the time. Stepdad or stepmom, sister, sibling, whoever steps in, when really they're not the parent of the child. They need to leave that to the actual parents of the child. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, you run into situations, yeah, which happens a lot. And then, you know, same as the parenting style conversation that we had, you know what I mean? You keep throwing more and more and more people in. All parenting styles are not going to align. You throw in a step sibling or a step parent, you know, they may have a third parenting style compared to the actual two parents, which, you know, second go around. I mean, if you know, if I was to start dating somebody or getting serious with somebody, obviously, like, they're going to know what my parenting style is and what is within their, you know, realm of stuff that they can, you know, approach or deal with, or that kind of thing. You know, if it's something that my daughter wouldn't get in trouble from me or her mother, then obviously the step parent, you know, you're not going to discipline my kid when it's not something I discipline them for. But it's you know, that wraps up into the boundaries. You know, if my ex's boyfriend, like, obviously, like, they have clear boundaries about what his role is, what he, you know, as far as what goes on in their house and what his limitations are. It'll be more interesting later when my daughter gets a little older and starts pushing, you know, the boundaries as a teenager does. You know, some of these things will probably come up a little more then than it does now as like a 7-8-year-old. But if everybody's on the same page and knows where they stand and knows what their boundaries are, I'm okay with people doing whatever they're going to do and doing the best that they can. Obviously, you know, I have no issue with him being able to sign her school stuff or being able to sign sports stuff, dance stuff, whatever. You know what I mean? If she needs a signature on a field trip deal, like, and he's added up to school and stuff, and that doesn't bother me. You know, I work along out of town. The mom, my ex, she works from home, so typically she deals with all that stuff anyway. But if she was out of town or something, it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, along with that, you know, one of the boundaries is it's not his final decision. You know, he doesn't get to just decide on what gets signed at the school, or, you know, you know, she's not going to school today, but not tell me or her mother, that kind of stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So to having communication and boundaries, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
you can get into a lot of trouble with it if you're just sort of letting everybody wing it, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. What advice would you give to male parents and caregivers? You know, maybe they're going through a very hard time with parenting, co-parenting.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe everything's going great and their communication set and everything's going great. What would you say to either parent? One that's going through a very hard time, one everything's just, you know, going good so far.
Uh, if you're going through a harder time, go deeper, I guess. You know, try to figure out the root for what is making it difficult, because the things that you're usually arguing about is not what the root anger is over. Identify your triggers and your unresolved feelings, you know, whether it be shame, anger, resentment, you know, whatever the case may be, you know, that you're feeling, but figure out what's triggering you to react certain ways, and then avoid those situations and avoid those conversations, and deal with all the stuff that you need to deal with, and process all the that you need to get to a place to where you're not arguing all the time, or in conflict as much. And if things are going good,
Mm-hmm.
Keep open communication. You know, just because things are going good doesn't mean that you all of a sudden don't need to communicate with the other person, or you allow them to start overstepping boundaries, or vice versa, you know. But empathy is probably the main thing, you know, even if things are going good. If you don't want them to do it to you, don't do it to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, I always, you know, for me, I did that. You know, it was easy to empathize. You know, I didn't do anything that I didn't want her to do to me.
Mm.
And so that kept the back and forth tennis ball of insulting or actions out of a lot of situations, but also being able to empathize was a big part of it. And knowing that I was be confident in who you are and what you're doing as a parent, because kids aren't stupid. And so even if, you know, it never bugged me to think, you know, whether or not she may have been bad mouthing me around my daughter or not, because it's all going to come out in the wash, you know.
Oh yeah.
I know that who I am, and that I'm a good dad and stuff, and I don't have to prove it to anybody, because my daughter knows, you know. And if something happened to me, you know, she knows that I love her and that I did everything I could for her. So I never had to worry. So try not to worry about things you can't control. And
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to touch on?
I don't think so. I mean, mostly the three things, you know, that come up the most, or that I sort of the three biggest things that helped me in my co-parenting journey was, you know, the leaving and the pity party and not feeling sorry for yourself, and grieving the relationship and all of that, working on yourself kind of stuff. And then, you know, not engaging is usually one thing that I tell people, whether it's them throwing a fit at pick up, drop off, and you either taking it or adding into it or causing, you know, double the big scene in the parking lot somewhere, or, you know, if you know that the person, you know, don't engage in their toxic behavior, you know, if you know that they're going to try to keep you at their house when you're dropping the kids off, then don't drop the kids off at their house, you know. And then the third one is the boundaries, you know, set those boundaries. If you don't feel safe going to where they live to drop your kids off, then they can pick the kids up or find a mutual place that you feel comfortable with, you know, and hold that boundary.
Yeah. Speaking of safe, safety is of course big, you know, for kids and anybody. All right. So
right.
I do acknowledge and understand that everyone is at a different place and journey when it comes to parenting. Obviously, if it's not safe to drop your kids off, I don't know, go to the big guys, the court, and figure it out and make sure it's safe for everybody, because sometimes things can turn bad very quick. People very, very quick.
I mean, you know, if you feel unsafe, or you feel unsafe, you feel like your children are in an unsafe place, you don't have to feel guilty by not allowing you to use yourself to be in that position or your kids to be in that position, because you feel like you're robbing the other person of their parenting time or something like that. Like your children are the most important part, and they need to be put first, especially their safety. And if they live in a place that is not safe for your kids, then you need to alert the police or alert the courts, or, you know, whether, you know, it's sometimes the majority of the times that it sort of gets brought up is, say the dad has less visitation rights than the mom, and the mom's new boyfriend is a convicted sex offender or physical abuser or something like that, and lives in the home with the mom. And so, you know, the dad absolutely still has the right to be able to call the police, get the kids, you know. And the general mind frame or thought about it, you know, from the father's standpoint is most of the time those guys are somewhat beaten down by the moms already. And if I cause the waves, or if I stand up for myself, then I'm not going to see my kids. And so I'll just be the quiet mouse and just let it eat at me until I absolutely explode, rather than, you know, regardless of what's going on, if your children are in an unsafe place, you typically have the courts to back you up. You know, they're going to look out for the best interests of the children. Now, I mean, same as any other institution, you know, the courts aren't going to get it right 100% of the time. And so, but if you don't do anything, then you might as well be the one doing it to them.
Yeah.
Rather than the mom's boyfriend, because turning a blind eye rather than protecting your children, to me, is just as bad.
Yeah. And there can be a lot of resentment. I'm speaking from my own experience.
Right.
Because I was in the home, cheating, lie, beating, all of it. And today I'm like, why didn't she leave? She eventually did, after my mom almost nearly died from
Right.
severe abuse. But it wasn't just her that was dying. I'm
Right.
sitting here as an adult pretty fucked up.
Right.
Right? I've
Well,
had to work through quite a bit of stuff. And
yeah.
there can be resentment from the child
Well,
to
yeah.
everybody that was involved.
Yeah. Well, you want to know why your mom didn't protect you,
Yeah.
when you were a kid. Like, why didn't you protect me? Why didn't you stand up for me? Why didn't you get me out of there?
Mm-hmm.
Why did you let it happen to me? And then those emotions will carry through and evolve into bigger emotions of, well, then she just didn't love me, or,
Mm-hmm.
and only every individual person, has their own emotional traumas from childhood, and nobody has a traumaless childhood by any means, but
Mm-hmm.
where your mental pathways are going to take your thought process and emotions and feelings and trauma and
Mm-hmm.
way of thinking about past events is, I had both parents around, and it wasn't an physically abusive home, but there was elements of mental and emotional abuse and gaslighting and narcissism and stuff like that. And it took me a long time to work through a lot of that stuff, because for a lot of my young adult life, like, I didn't feel worthy of being happy, and didn't feel worthy of love, because the people who were supposed to didn't.
Yeah, yeah, that makes two of us. And a lot of people do struggle with that. That's why it starts very young.
Mm-hmm.
Even sometimes before a child is born, there's trauma,
Right.
and that's where it starts. Let's touch a little bit on abuse.
Mm-hmm.
When a child tell a parent
Right.
what happened to them by a family member or the other parent or the boyfriend,
Mm-hmm.
the ex-partner, why is it so hard for some parents to believe their child that they're telling the truth?
Uh, it
Sorry, that was a big question.
well, there's it anytime that you're sort of wading in the waters of trauma or abuse or
Mm.
anything like that, uh it can go so many different branching ways. It's a big space, and it's a big area. I would say, if say my ex's boyfriend was doing something to my daughter, or maybe his son, he's just a couple years older than my daughter,
Mm.
and she said something to her mom about it, and her mom didn't believe her, odds are that there's a layer of deep-seated trauma that hasn't been worked through on the parent side, that would want them to continue to ignore it, or not believe them, or tell themselves that the child is lying, or being untruthful, or something like that. And so it would, would probably stem from more of a trauma that they haven't dealt with, or a thought process, mindset, way of thinking that they haven't acknowledged or dealt with. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A lot of times it would be more along the lines of somebody who needs somebody else to feel worthy, or to feel like
Mm-hmm.
they matter. And if they lose that person, whether that person is doing wrong or not, then a lot of people have a hard time being alone, or you know
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you go through years of programming and abuse and stuff like that, you won't believe it, even if it's proven to you on camera. You see a lot of those stories where mothers don't believe that their kids are capable of doing these things, even knowing they just watched their kid do it on camera.
Yeah.
And will still make excuses and act like it's not happening.
Yeah.
And so, you know, even in those situations, like, yes, the kid's doing it, and everybody else in the world knows that kid's doing it. But until the parent works through whatever traumas or baggage that they have going on that are making them turn a blind eye or make excuses,
Yeah.
It really just kind of, there's a lot of reasons why. I know a woman who has a couple kids, and the dad, her ex-husband, isn't what you would say would be the most involved, but she went through a certain amount of physical and emotional abuse for their whole marriage of 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so her shame and guilt, probably from religious views and growing up, the programming, that if you get married, you're married for life. If you get divorced, you failed. So then you got all that shame, and then the dad isn't as involved as maybe you would like to see, or you would think he would be. And so then she overcompensates, makes excuses for him, sort of smothers the kids, and enables the behaviors. Even knowing they're divorced, she still enables the abusive behaviors that he did when they were married.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't want my kids to be in a house that's dirty, and so she'll pick up his house or whatever, like just odd things. But
Mm-hmm.
until she deals with whatever trauma and programming she's received over the last 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
that's how it's going to be. But in turn, her two sons are grown up learning that
Mm-hmm.
if you treat people like shit and bully them into doing what you want, that's how adults act, because that's the way what they're learning and what they're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but she doesn't see it that way. So even explaining it to her, trying to go through it with her, like, that's not what in her mind was what's going on. And so
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would say that would be probably my what I would think.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time it's going to be past dramas or past programming or abuse that they haven't processed or want to deal with, that would make them
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
think that way. I can't imagine thinking your child's lying to you about something like that.
Yeah. And yeah, with society and culture, and sometimes people are so quick to judge.
Mm-hmm.
All I can say is for people to stay in their lane, because if
Mm-hmm.
someone has the time to judge someone else, there's really something else going on with them. They're
Right.
reflecting what they're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And they're very quick to judge people, how they parent, the way they're raising their kids, where they live and who they live with, instead
Right.
of minding their own business, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's their full-time job to make people miserable. I say to those people, stay in your lane.
Right.
Right? Because we are programmed, like you said, by society. Oh, if we're
Mm-hmm.
divorced, we're just bad, we don't feel good, and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe your divorce saved your life, right?
Right.
Not all storms that comes in this life are meant to wipe us out. They're actually
Right.
teaching us lessons, and they're rebuilding us as who we're supposed to be and who we're supposed to
Yeah.
become. Yeah.
And I mean, so my parents were married almost my entire life.
Mm.
My dad passed away a few years ago, but there was a spot when I was in high school where they separated for like 6 months. But other than that, they were together my entire life.
Mhm.
My daughter's mother's parents have been married her entire life, but they were a blended family. They both had children going into their marriage.
Mhm.
And my house was fairly miserable with two parents in the household, and
Mm.
I always, my train of thinking was always, two happy households are probably better than one miserable one.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I never felt the pressure to white knuckle it or grit my teeth and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
be in this relationship because it's going to be so much better for the kid to have both my daughter to have both of us in the same house, even though we're both miserable. And it's just not a very loving, fun place to be.
Yeah.
Where in turn, you know, my ex is happy with her boyfriend and they have a good life, and I'm happy with my life, and now I'm at peace,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and we all get along, and it's no big deal. Like I just don't
Mm-hmm.
see how being miserable or but if you're programmed to believe that breaking up and raising children in split homes and
Mm-hmm.
all these things is shameful or wrong,
Mm-hmm.
then that's where you start running into a lot of those kinds of issues, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Let's get to know you more, just a little bit more before we wrap up. So,
Okay.
who made you the man that you are today?
Well, I would be a blend. So we spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house when we were little kids.
Mm,
And then there are a lot of tendencies, you know, I would probably say my grandfather and my dad
mhm,
for different reasons. But my grandfather for in the place that I grew up and the way of life that it was,
mhm,
your parents didn't have as much time because everybody was struggling and fairly poor and just trying to survive. But your grandparents were usually had more time. And so a little more patience, a little less stress, and a little more time, right?
mhm,
So I learned a lot of that from my grandpa. And then my dad inadvertently shaped me into the person that I am by using his flaws to or things that I felt growing up or the way that he was shaped me into being the opposite because of the way that the generation, you know, and then as I started getting into personal development and figuring out how to process trauma and
mhm, mhm,
programming and all of these things, there was a lot of, you know, he did the best that he could with the tools that he had, but
mhm,
being a little bit of an explosive temper, a little bit of a narcissist,
mhm,
a little standoffish, but he grew up in a super alcoholic home where he was belittled by his alcoholic father, and everybody sort of hid from his dad when he would get home from work and those kinds of things. And even knowing he wasn't drinking, some of those behaviors followed him, but I didn't want to follow
mhm,
in that path. And so consciously I made an effort
mhm.
to deal with my bullshit. So I didn't pass it down to my daughter, you know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a choice. Yeah. If you could change one thing in the world, what would it be?
I would get rid of the us versus them mentality that is sort of spreading through everything.
Mhm,
I'm wrong, you're right, my way's better, your way's wrong.
mhm.
I would get rid of all of that
Yeah.
because everybody has good ideas and everybody does some things well and some things maybe not as well as you, but nobody's perfect. Everybody's flawed. So the idea of standing on somebody else to make yourself shine brighter or a little bit taller needs to go away, and everybody just needs to work together to make everything better, not just better for this side or that side or these people or those people.
Yeah. Can you imagine if all of us look the same, talk the same, walk the same, I mean,
Right.
how boring would that be? But
Right.
here we are, we have diversity, we have color, culture, language,
Hmm.
religion, and we're
Hmm.
bickering at each other just because we're
Hmm.
different. What if all of us were cloned, we're all the same? That I
Right.
would be so bored.
Right. Right.
Right? So I agree with what you said.
And you get down here in the States, and it's everywhere, you know.
Mm,
My news station that I watch is better than your news station that you watch because ours tells me that you are wrong,
what?
left
Yeah.
and right, and political, and you know,
Hmm.
sports. You know what I mean? Like nobody goes to a sporting event to watch a good game. If your team my team wins, your team loses, then everybody's fighting in parking lots and out there maliciously trying to hurt each other and stuff like that. And it's like it's entertainment.
Yeah.
You're talking about college football, you know, or you know, it's not,
Yeah.
you know, focus on something that matters, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
like
I agree. Yeah.
poverty or
Hmm.
you know
Yeah.
all the veterans all around the world that are going through mental illness because they protected everybody's right to live the way that they wanted to live, and now they're living on the streets. Like focus on stuff that matters. You know what I mean? Not
Hmm.
us, me versus you, or you're wrong and I'm right, you know. So that
Yeah.
would be the one thing I would want changed.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. What is the meaning of life for you?
Meaning of life,
Mm.
for me to have a meaningful life would be to be a good parent.
Mm. Yeah. Nice. Um, so where can my listeners find you and support your work?
Mostly I just do everything through Instagram, which is just my name.
Hmm. Hmm.
And other than that, I mean, all the links on different podcasts that I go on to, and if anybody wanted to ask questions or reach out or something like that, then you know, Instagram messages is the best way to do that.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Awesome. Well, JP, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and thank you for sharing your story and journey with us. And keep doing you. Keep doing what
Yeah,
you're doing. And I'm just
thank
so
you for having me.
uplifted and inspired. You're welcome.